Good morning and welcome to the CPI Brexit webinar, the second in our Brexit webinars as we approach the end of the Brexit transition period. First of all, a quick introduction for myself. My name's Andrew Large. I'm Director General of the Confederation of Paper Industries. And before we start proceedings today, I would just like to make the following competition law notice. It's very important that during this event, as all other CPI events, we are fully compliant with competition law. So members must not discuss or disclose any commercially sensitive information during the meeting. I very strongly advise not to do so outside it. And so we must not discuss or share any non-public strategic information regarding the business, and we must stick to the event agenda. And please note, specifically in these new digital meetings, private messaging via Teams or other apps during the meeting regarding commercial and strategic business issues is strictly prohibited. So today, 28 days as we are from the end of the Brexit transitional period, we're going to be discussing a number of issues with regards to the end of transition and the implication for the UK's paper-based industries. This is a webinar that takes place at a time of very, very significant economic and political upheaval. There are multiple and simultaneous challenges to the UK. So as we all know, we have the global COVID-19 pandemic. We have, as a result of that, very significant global economic dislocation, both as a result of the disease itself and also the measures to combat that disease. And as we recently heard in the comprehensive spending review, the UK economy is scheduled and forecast to be 11.3% smaller at the end of 2020 than it was at the beginning of 2020, the biggest economic recession probably in 300 years. And overlaying all of that is the long-running issue of Brexit and the end of the transitional period. And the focus of today's webinar is Brexit, the end of the transitional period, and the issues with which we are having to come to grips with. And you know, at the time of scheduling this seminar, we felt that there might be clarity on whether or not there was a free trade agreement with the European Union, but less than 1 month to go until the end of transition. We still have no formal announcement, and we still do not know in a number of areas what the situation will be at the end of this year. So today's programme is going to cover key Brexit issues for the UK's paper-based industries. I'm very pleased to have colleagues who will be looking at a negotiating update, so giving the absolute latest readout on where the UK and EU are in their negotiations. We then have 2 sessions covering trade with Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, because the Northern Ireland Protocol means that there are some specific issues there. We then have a further speaker looking at the border related issues and making sure that UK exports and imports can continue. And our final speaker will be looking at the timber regulation and particularly the issues for wood-based products and trade in those products. So we have a good range of speakers from BEIS, from HMRC, from the Office of Product Safety and Security, and from NCASE, a corrugated business, all of whom are experts in these particular areas. And I'm looking forward to their presentations today. Just some housekeeping before we move on to the formal program today. This session is being recorded and a link will be sent to participants afterwards. Please could you interact with the speakers using the Q&A function in Teams. I will ask your questions to the speakers at the end of each of their sessions. Otherwise, we'll ensure we follow up in writing after the event. You can see on the presentation slide, live event Q&A logo highlighted there in green, and that is the functionality to use in order to make sure that you are providing us with questions. Due to time lags in the system, be useful if you could ask your questions early in each session and make sure that we have your names and email addresses if you want us to follow up offline. And in the unlikely event that MS Teams goes down, if you could please log back in with the original bit.ly link in your reminder email, we will have got the session back up and running by the time that you come to log back in. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Ryan is well known to many of us inside CPI. He's made presentations in a number of fora to us. He's a senior policy advisor on international trade, infrastructure and materials. He's been an incredibly useful resource for CPI and for our members over the whole of the Brexit period, particularly with regards to where we are with trading issues. And Ryan's first presentation today will be the negotiation update, where he's going to be giving us a briefing on where the negotiations between the UK and EU have reached. So thank you very much for speaking today, Ryan, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right. As Andrew just said, difficult as it is with things not having concluded, I'm going to give a quick update on UK-EU negotiations and some other negotiations of importance to industry in the UK as well. I'm going to give a couple of reminders of additional resources for preparing for different trading arrangements from the 1st of January onwards. Although obviously throughout the rest of the session today, we're going to focus on some of the most important areas of preparation in a bit more detail. And I'll leave a little bit of time for questions just on this first portion of the day as well. So next slide, please, Katie. Thank you very much. So you may have seen this, maybe a bit of deja vu in terms of this slide from when we last spoke to each other on the 6th of November. But absolutely things have moved on significantly in terms of the amount of the potential free trade agreement between the UK and the EU that has been agreed at a very detailed level. So we're pretty close now, actually, in most of the areas of detail, especially on goods market access, which is obviously very important to each of us in this session today. I'm very happy to take particular questions on that. My own part of negotiations has been feeding in, especially to the teams looking at things like tariffs and rules of origin. We will have a zero tariff deal, but a zero tariff deal is only a zero tariff deal if people can prove the origin of their products. So there are still some difficult discussions to be had on some of the detail there. I won't bore you with those, but in the last couple of weeks, an awful lot of the detailed legal clauses of the agreement have been, if not locked down, very close to being so. I don't need to tell you the political issues right at the top of the agreement are the things that matter for getting it over the line or not. You will see that there are probably conflicting accounts, really. So what we're hearing through UK negotiators is still a fair amount of positivity. Lots of things are being locked down and tidied up for a final reckoning on some of the issues where both sides, I feel, need to find some compromises at political level. You might see that today Michel Barnier has had to account for himself to EU member states, and I wouldn't discount the idea that there will be EU member states who feel that he's going too far with compromises with the UK. Certainly not our perspective from UK negotiating teams, but it's not done yet. There's been an awful lot of progress. It's obviously very frustrating for people who are just trying to do business that it is not in place yet, although I hope obviously that we will come to you pretty soon and tell you what's in a deal and how to make use of it. And that's something that I'm very happy to pick up with CPI members alongside lots of other trade associations and sectors that I deal with. I think it is worth very quickly touching upon some other markets fairly close to home. where there are separate agreements going on. So just in case any of you have an interest in any of these, the UK is still trying to look at sort of bridging and mitigation arrangements with partners such as the EFTA states, including Norway, and also with Turkey, where in both cases we've now sadly missed some ratification deadlines for getting the sort of really comprehensive new free trade agreements that we wanted. These will still be negotiated, but not in time for the 1st of January for sure. But we are in both of those cases looking at transition, bridging arrangements that can at least allow goods to continue to flow between all of those parties, tariff-free as well. So I'm happy to take questions on other negotiations as well as the UK's negotiations with the EU. Next slide, please. Again, not to teach people again, a reminder of what a free trade agreement of the kind the UK and EU are currently negotiating means, and I guess by extension what it doesn't mean. So it might not be as applicable or maybe as important for some of the primary product here that doesn't have or has 0% MFN tariff rates, but obviously the basics are that across the board there would be tariff-free access between the two markets, very useful for importing all sorts of products from the EU. As I've said, though, that does rely on goods having originating status in one of the parties, so it being a genuinely a UK-EU good that's being moved between the two, and not something that's a Chinese good that's being transshipped, for example. So rules of origin are a very important part of actually practically ensuring that tariff-free trade happens. And indeed, there will be some business models where they may find it a struggle to use the agreement in order to avoid tariffs, so that is worth bearing in mind, and something that as soon as an agreement is there, people like me will be coming out to industry again to say what the rules are and how they can be used. Many of you will be very concerned about road freight, I'm sure. Now, I'm about to say that almost everything myself and other speakers will talk about later on in terms of customs procedures, VAT and so on, they're going to happen anyway. Free trade agreement is definitely not going to land the UK remaining in the EU's customs union. We're going to have separate regulatory regimes, whatever happens in negotiations as they're wrapped up. We're going to have a separate VAT area, and we're going to have separate customs areas. So what we're discussing later really is something that negotiations are not going to change in a substantial way as they speak, and I can't emphasize that enough. Things we are hoping to do through them, though, are still important and still very much worthwhile. So we are still looking for cooperation with the EU on transport and customs to make things cheaper, to make the systems behind the scenes for people easier. So that may not impact whether you as a trading business have to have customs declarations made on your behalf, but hopefully some of the things we're looking for to cooperate on within the agreement will make things like road haulage cheaper. For example, by increasing market access for UK hauliers. This is not something that has been agreed, but it's something the UK is still aiming to agree as part of the FTA. Likewise on services and movement of people. So the default and a non-negotiated outcome means that there will be loads of additional barriers, unfortunately, to, for example, people moving engineers between sites in the UK and the EU without having to look at qualifications that they have, and even visa requirements for longer term hands-on work. So yes, in the free trade agreement negotiations, the UK is still trying to make that sort of thing easier. Obviously, unilaterally, the UK is offering, I think, quite an extensive package for short-term business travel from the EU, which should enable you to make use of EU service providers without too many changes. The same is not quite so true the other direction. So the negotiators are still working to try and make that easier. It may not be number one concern for most of you on the call today, but all of these things really do make a very big difference as a whole. On regulations, again, I cannot stress enough, the negotiations will not take away the fact that we're going to have different regimes for chemicals, for all the goods that are currently CE marked, for example, and a whole host of other regulations that are important as well. I know we'll come to timber later. Negotiations will not remove the fact that the UK is going to have its own regulatory regimes. So all of that we've spoken about before in the last session on the 6th of November, and we'll speak about later today, is going to be the case anyway. So don't wait around for negotiations to deliver something that effectively is not on the table. You also see, of course, we're not really touching upon issues like immigration or movement of people too much in today's session, but I'm very happy to take whatever questions you have on some of these other areas that we're not looking at in detail today, both in the Q&A session in a minute and obviously later on when we have a general Q&A session. Next slide, please. I don't think I need to develop on this. Having said that there are lots of things we're not covering in detail today, I just thought I'd share again some of the places to go to get them. I think we can skip this one because you've probably already been there. Again, if you do have feedback on areas of guidance that just seem obtuse or not detailed enough, then please do share that with us. One of my jobs is to try to ensure that policy guidance from different bits of government is accessible to you. So a placeholder is there for that as well, and perhaps in the Q&A session, if you have concerns about guidance that is out there, please do share them today. Next slide, please. And there are some more preparation resources here as well. If you're not fed up with webinars, but you are interested in things like intellectual property, in CE, UKCA marking, in transfer of personal data, and so on, there are some specific webinar sessions that have been videoed, and alongside them some checklists that you can still sign up for at the link at the top of the slide on screen. We're hearing from HMRC colleagues, and we're talking as well about the border operating model today, but in case you need it, the link is also on screen. And also, if you feel that you need more on customs declaration requirements in particular, there are a series of webinars HMRC is running at the moment. I'm told that it's quite difficult to get a slot, but they are adding new dates all the time. So the link is there in the second bullet point on screen. And we'll hear from my colleague Alex from HMRC about Northern Ireland, but again, the general link to guidance is on screen as well. Next slide, please. So I will just give a moment here for if anyone has questions, I guess, on negotiations in particular. Owing to the fact we'll pick up some of the practicalities of preparing for the 1st of January a little bit later. Andrew, I don't know if anyone has got any questions on negotiations, but happy to take those now or otherwise move on.
Thank you, Ryan. We've got a couple of questions have come in already. The first is from one of our colleagues who's asking whether these slides can be shared with both internally inside the UK, but then also within suppliers within the EU. Is that going to be okay?
Yeah, of course. This is the thing. I never learn the lesson, right? Always at a webinar, the first 5 questions are, can we have the slides afterwards? Absolutely, of course. Keep forgetting to add that at the start of presentations, but there you go. Great.
Thanks very much, Ryan. We've had a second question come in, which is, in view of the short time frames with regards to the end of transition, at what point now can business expect to receive a definitive update from government so we'll know where, what the position is going to be at the end of the year?
That's a very good question. It's one that I would ask myself. This may make people in the audience snort, but I really cannot say. Although, from my perspective, even we as officials keep getting told, oh, we're almost close, and obviously we're prepared to turn guidance around very, very quickly. So in the event, I can't say when negotiators are going to actually conclude stuff, we were told last week it would have to be that week. We're told this week it has to be this week. It could be this week, it could be next. I know that is extremely frustrating. All I can say is when there is an outcome to negotiations, we will turn around a summary of that extremely quickly, and as much of the relevant policy detail on what the negotiations have landed on as possible within 48 hours of their conclusion. And then we will also obviously come out to you and talk about the detail. So there are areas in negotiations, as I've said, lots of the things we talk about today are going to be the same. So we should already all be working together on doing those already. In the areas where negotiations really have big substantive changes, we're going to get that guidance out very quickly. We will certainly offer to do something like this again, just to talk through what questions people have. That's very much on the table from my perspective. I'm happy to help out with that. And indeed, in certain areas of negotiations, just say that the table, whether there should be some very limited bridging arrangements as well. That is absolutely not guaranteed by any means, but it is something that negotiators are, of course, thinking about in the areas where businesses would have to turn around new procedures, for example, on rules of origin, extremely quickly. So there is a recognition in negotiating teams of that as well, just how late in the day things are. But I think there is probably quite a lot of stuff for us to work through that isn't contingent on the free trade agreement, and obviously the stuff that is, we will turn it around extremely quickly. I know it's frustrating that we can't say when negotiations will finish, what day you're going to have certainty on that. I don't know either, but we will be out very quickly with details as soon as agreement is reached.
Thank you, Ryan. That's very, very helpful. We've had a couple of questions come in on heat treatment of pallets in particular, and I'm going to hold those over until our colleague from OPSS is speaking later on in the webinar, because I know that he'll have the latest information on those. One final question, Ryan, that's come in that I think is probably for you to answer. One of our questioners is reporting that there have been rumours this morning of a 6-month delay to customs procedures between GB and NI, and they wondered if there was any comment on that from you.
6-month delay, no. So again, maybe Alex in a second is probably the person who'll know much more about that than me, but I haven't heard anything involving a 6 months delay there. The only 6 months that's probably most important, we'll talk about later, is the timelines for staged import declarations, should people choose to do them from the EU into Great Britain. So I don't know if there's a conflation there of things or not, but as I said, Alex, our next speaker, might know a fair bit more than me about that particular subject on Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Ryan. And just one last question then, which has just come in. Due to the short time until the end of transition, there's been discussion about potential grace periods before new rules are applied. Is there anything you can say about that?
So I think the short answer here is that the UK is already in our staged import declarations for customs, in allowing CE marked products in most areas where underlying standards don't change to still be placed on the market in the UK for the whole of next year. On things like chemicals regulation, where we've shifted the timelines and made it much longer before people have to buy data, we are already trying to do lots of different things in order to have a grace period on a number of changes. In terms of the agreement, I cannot stress enough that the number of things in it which will involve new procedures for people are very, very slim. In those areas, as I just said, negotiators are absolutely cognizant of the fact that businesses might have a very short turnaround time for compliance in certain areas like rules of origin that I discussed. This is not something the EU is immediately keen on, so let's put that out there first. It is very much a matter of negotiation, but it is something that negotiators are aware of. I really can't say very much more than that, but I really would stress again that in some of the areas for exporters that are most important, for example, EU import procedures on customs, unfortunately there won't be a grace period, but where the UK has been able to take unilateral measures for UK customs, regulations and so on, I think we have sought to do that.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Ryan. That was been an incredibly helpful update in the negotiations. We do understand that you are but the messenger in this, and you share many of the frustrations that that people are feeling about this. So we're grateful for the update today, and we would of course be extremely grateful for any further update that you would be able to give as the negotiations unfold in these last few weeks of discussions. It's now my pleasure to introduce our second speaker. We're very pleased to have secured Alex Vince from HM Revenue and Customs. Alex is the Deputy Lead on Northern Ireland stakeholder engagement with a specific focus on customs and border design. Alex is focused here for the webinar today on trade with Northern Ireland issues. This is an issue of significant importance to the CPI membership. There's a very substantial trade in paper and board between GB and NI, and also between GB and the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, with many customers, particularly in the food and drink sector, seeking to move material across all of those borders and seeking guidance as to what they need to do and how we need to operate things in the new Northern Ireland Protocol environment. So thank you very much for being able to present today, Alex, and I'm very pleased to hand over to you for your presentation on trade with Northern Ireland.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So bear with me 1 second as I share my screen. Hopefully that comes up without too much of an issue. So hello, while we wait for that to load up, my name's Alex Vince, and as said, I'm the Deputy Lead for Northern Ireland engagement when it comes to customs. So particularly I'm here to kind of handle some customs queries, and then if there are questions about VAT, etc., I may do my best to have a punt, but customs is really my background. So what I aim to do in this session is talk to you guys about what you need to broadly know about the Northern Ireland Protocol, and then what you need to do with that information. So the key thing here is the steps that we need to be taking to be ready for the end of the transition period on the 1st of January. So a quick update, and I know this kind of picks up on a question that was asked about 5 minutes ago. Hopefully this gets us all into the same place. But from the 1st of January this year, our trading arrangements will be based on either a withdrawal agreement or a free trade agreement. But the work on the Northern Ireland Protocol is independent of whatever the future trading arrangement is. What I mean by that is that the challenges that we're trying to solve with the Northern Ireland Protocol will still exist regardless of whatever the future trading arrangement is. So the work here still matters regardless of where we end up at the end of the transition period. So yes, the Northern Ireland Protocol designed as a solution to a series of practical problems that come about as we are making a commitment to ensure there's no hard border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the Republic of Ireland. And so this is all about how mechanically that can function. So as you guys may be aware, there is going to be a staged introduction to customs when it comes to movements between GB and the EU at large. So if you're moving goods from Dover to France, etc., you have that 6th month kind of staged introduction. But I can clarify at the moment that there is no plan for there to be a staged introduction of custom or movement requirements when it comes to movements to do with Northern Ireland. So the rules I will set out today will be in effect from the 1st of January next year. So we do inherently have a month left to be ready for that. So yes, just to broadly cover before I go into the specifics, the Northern Ireland Protocol will be ensuring that there will be unfettered access for Northern Ireland goods to the entirety of the UK market. Ensure that no tariffs will be in place for goods that remain within the UK customs territory. It will ensure that we do meet our obligations without the need for any new customs infrastructure, and it will guarantee that Northern Ireland businesses will benefit from the free trade agreements that the UK as a whole will secure with the rest of the world in the years to come. So first up, a quick primer if you're not familiar with what the Northern Ireland Protocol is. Northern Ireland is leaving the EU alongside the rest of the UK, because Northern Ireland remains a part of the UK, and everything that we talk about now is about making sure that the Northern Ireland, which remains within the UK's customs union, can also move goods successfully between itself and the Republic of Ireland, because we've committed to no borders and no hard processes between the two. So yes, the key thing here is that considering customs territories, you can kind of say that Northern Ireland sits both within the UK customs territory and within the EU customs territory. So how I'll kind of progress through this is I'll basically talk about the main movements. So I'll give the major updates there. So the first main movement that you may be considering is moving goods between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and this is the purpose behind the Northern Ireland Protocol inherently. So no hard border, no fiscal infrastructure, no checks or processes, no customs duties or tariffs. Inherently, if your good is in free circulation in Northern Ireland, it can then move into the Republic of Ireland without going through additional processes. And then if it is in the Republic of Ireland, it can move into Northern Ireland without additional processes. So I believe if you're doing things like intrastat declarations at the moment, those will still continue, but there will be no new processes introduced as a result of us leaving the EU when it comes to moving goods between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And as you all probably are very well aware, there's no processes between the Republic of Ireland and the rest of the EU. So inherently, there is no process between Northern Ireland and moving goods to and from the rest of the EU, as there's no checks, no borders. It is a free circulation. So that's the first major type of movement we will want to be aware of. The second major type of movement is goods from Northern Ireland to the rest of Great Britain. So, Scotland, Wales and England. So this is west to east across the Irish Sea, and we call this broadly unfettered access. So the idea behind unfettered access is that we are striving to make sure that trade that goes from Northern Ireland into the rest of the UK's customs territory remains very similar as it does today. We want there to be no significant changes in that trade after the end of the transition period. So what that means in practice: no import customs declarations, no entry summary declarations, no tariffs applied for goods from NI entering the rest of GB, no customs checks, no new regulatory checks, and no additional approvals required for placing goods on the market in the rest of the UK. So inherently, we're keeping this as close as possible to current trade. Now, there will be some very limited exceptions. I think one that is commonly floated is the trade in endangered animals. So if anyone on this call is trading in endangered animals at the moment, you may need to be aware that there'll be some changes in processes, but I have yet to encounter a business that actually does that. So most of your trade will remain very similar as it does today. Now, unfettered access all depends upon definitions. So I just want to set out the current definition for unfettered access will be goods that are in free circulation in Northern Ireland that are not under customs controls. So inherently, if your good is in Northern Ireland, it can be moved into GB. Now, this will be accompanied in the weeks ahead by anti-avoidance rules. And these rules will basically set out if your purpose to move goods through Northern Ireland into GB is to avoid duties that you would otherwise be paying. So inherently, you'd be doing an EU to GB movement, but you're just taking it through Northern Ireland purely to use unfettered access to avoid duties. The anti-avoidance rules in place will be there to catch that and prevent that from happening. And when those rules come out, we can go into the detail of how they will function, as that is my compliance colleagues who are pulling that all together. But yes, from the 1st of January, we will be doing a goods-based approach to unfettered access to help ensure that flow of trade between Northern Ireland to GB isn't disrupted. Later on in 2021, we will be looking at a business-based definition of unfettered access, and this phase 2 definition will instead look at where your businesses are based, etc., to ensure that the benefits of unfettered access are enjoyed by Northern Ireland-based businesses and GB traders. So that will be the phase 2 definition of unfettered access, but that will come later in 2021. no timelines for that. We will be working across industry and with the Northern Ireland Executive on that definition, but that is the long-term goal at the moment, is to ensure that only businesses in Northern Ireland later in 2021 and in GB will be able to enjoy unfettered access. But from the 1st of January, goods-based approach, if your good is in Northern Ireland and it is moving into GB at the moment, then that can continue with very little change. The third type of movement I just want to flag is the opposite direction. So this is GB into NI. So as we've kind of set out in the first movement, there are no processes between Northern Ireland and the rest of the EU. So any processes and movements that would have to happen will be happening at this stage when it's goods from GB entering NI in the first place. And of course, the exact processes will kind of depend slightly on what the future trading arrangement is. But broadly, this should be a fairly good place to start. So yes, these will be new administrative processes, which will include new digital import declarations and digital safety and security declarations for goods moving across. Now, a key thing to keep in mind is that these processes will be managed by UK authorities, so HMRC and Border Force, and we will be checking proportional to the risk. And we need to ensure that these processes are in place so the correct duties are paid. So if a good is entering the rest of the EU, then EU duties are paid. But if a good is staying within the UK, aka staying in Northern Ireland, then there isn't a penalty for that the duties aren't being paid on those goods. And it also ensures that Northern Ireland can enjoy the same access to free trade agreements that we are securing with the rest of the world after the 1st of January. This kind of brings us to the concept of at-risk goods. Broadly, we're still waiting for an exact definition to be agreed, but we're hoping for that to come through this week. But the concept of an at-risk good is if a good is at risk of moving into the rest of EU from GB, then duties will be liable on it. And if a good is not at risk of moving into the rest of the EU, then it will not either have those duties will be waived or reimbursements will be in place for those duties. So before we have a precise definition, and the devil will be in the detail here, the recommendation we're making to businesses to prepare is this is all going to be about evidence. If you can provide really strong evidence that your good remains within Northern Ireland, then you will be able to argue that it is not at risk. And if you cannot provide very strong evidence, so you cannot reliably say where that good ends up, then it will be considered at risk of moving into the EU. So that's broadly, when we get a better definition, an agreed definition, then that will allow us to really focus on the technical detail. But very broadly, it's about the evidence that your businesses can present to show where your trade is going. Will depend on will determine if that trade is determined to be at risk of going into the EU or not. And then, of course, once it passes this stage, once it's in Northern Ireland, when it's in free circulation, then we will then look at Northern Ireland to EU movements, and I've kind of set that out in the first movement here. So yes, there will be new administrative processes, but we're also introducing the Trader Support Service, which is designed to be the system that we have in place to support movement of goods into Northern Ireland and help take the burden away from traders. Trader Support Service. It is a free-to-use digital service. It is designed to help GB-based businesses and traders of all size and NI-based traders navigate the changes to the way goods move at the end of the Northern Ireland, at the transition period under the Northern Ireland Protocol. So TSS will have two major purposes, and it is free to register. There is not a maximum capacity of businesses who can access it. So inherently, if you do not have a plan for how to move goods, then a Trader Support Service we recommend is the first place you stop and investigate to see if it is appropriate for you. But it will help you make those declarations and make those movements in the first place, and it will provide educational content to make sure that you have the skills and the knowledge required to move goods at the end of the transition period. So if you register the Trader Support Service now, there's a number of educational webinars and modules already available for you to access that goes into greater detail on a lot of these subjects. So yes, you should consider registering for the Trader Support Service. If you move goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, if you act on behalf of someone to move goods between Great Britain or Northern Ireland, are based in Northern Ireland and receive goods from outside of Northern Ireland, and send parcels between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, or bring parcels into Northern Ireland from outside the UK using Royal Mail or an express operator. And then we have the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy, which will provide key training modules, including seminars, webinars, and selected guides to help you understand these changes in greater detail. So yes, you can register today, and we do encourage this to be a very early stop when you're preparing. So what do you practically need to do between now and the 1st of January? The first thing is you should hopefully probably already have a GB-based EORI number if you're planning to move goods in and out of the UK. Now, if you're planning to move goods in and out of Northern Ireland or make a customs declaration there or get a customs decision, you will need an XI EORI number. Now, if you already have a GB EORI number, you should get an XI EORI number in middle of December. And we will be pushing these out in a few waves, and all it is the same number, but we're changing the prefix, and this will allow you to access different systems and get declarations and decisions. So the action to take here is to make sure you have a GB EORI number in the first place. So we have been pushing for the last 2 or 3 years for businesses to have these GB-based EORI numbers. You will need these if you're moving goods outside of the UK. So go to gov.uk EORI if you do not already have one, or you don't know if your business has one, and make sure that you register quickly if you want to have this all in place for the end of the year. Secondly, register for the Trader Support Service, particularly if you do not have alternative plans for how to move goods. Sign up for their training courses and online modules. But do also identify if your business has specialist needs that another provider or professional service may be able to help you meet. You know, every business is different. The Trader Support Service will give strong generalized support. Your business might have a very specific requirements, and so do also think that through. Finally, the latest government guidance is on gov.uk/transition, and this should be updated very regularly throughout December as more guidance comes out. So that will give you a good idea of the latest to do with preparations that need to be made for the end of the transition period. So that's me running through the presentation. I think now I'd be very happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Alex. There are a number of questions that have come in to the on the Q&A system this morning. The same question that I put to Ryan first about the rumours of 6-month delays or phasing in periods on GBNI customs procedures. Is that anything that you're able to comment on?
We are being very explicit at the moment that 1st of January is when the rules are in place. So, of course, can't comment on rumours and hearsay, but we are definitely encouraging people to get ready for the 1st of January.
Thank you very much. I have a question that's come in about the EUR1 form, which is currently used for declarations for EU trade. Question as to when or if that will be replaced, and when we will find out what the replacement for that will be.
I can't comment on the very technical detail of specific forms. I just do not have that level of knowledge, unfortunately. But I can assure you that guidance is going to be released throughout December on the exact delivery of what declarations will be required, what data fields are needed, etc. And those should go much more into the detail. But if you are not already registered with the Trader Support Service, then their online modules will also go into the technical detail of what needs to be done and what forms need to be filled out.
Thanks, Alex. Another question here about.
Sorry,
Could
I come in on that last question?
Yeah, of course.
The EUR1 form is for claiming preference in free trade agreements. So, unfortunately, there's a few different permutations here. So, if you're talking about it in NI in particular, maybe isn't helpful. It's more of a broader issue. So. There's a few things here. So, rules of origin, the UK is obviously in negotiation with the EU on what the procedures would be for claiming preference in a UK-EU free trade agreement. So this would include avoiding tariffs on trade to the Republic of Ireland via Northern Ireland, for example, but it's just a standard part of a free trade agreement. So in that case, we are trying to avoid traders having to use forms and stamps from chambers of commerce wherever possible, and trying to have self-declaration on invoices and customs paperwork, but obviously that's still under negotiation. In cases where the UK has rolled over an existing EU free trade agreement and people have been using EUR1 forms, there will be a UK form available. Unfortunately, it will be available from 1st of January onwards. So for continuing trade, if you're sending it beforehand, you should continue to use the current forms. And I will put a link with where the new UK form is going to be published as well, so we can share that afterwards. Sorry to jump in, I just wanted to take that question while it was hung in the air.
No, that's brilliant, Ryan. Thank you very much for coming in on that one. I've also got a question here about customs software, and there's a question really, and I don't know whether this is one for Alex or Ryan to update people on. Obviously, there was a change that was in place from Chief and C to CDS, and it would be worthwhile giving people an update on just where that is with regards to both UK EU trade and also GB NI trade. Ryan, please.
Just to say, I was planning to pick this up a little bit later. As I understand it, Alex can confirm for NI trade, things are being put through CDS, but I will cover this in more detail on GB to EU direct trade a little bit later. But Alex, I don't know if you can confirm that on CDS. I thought it was the case.
Yes.
Will be used for NI.
When it comes to movements in and out of NI, CDS is the system to use, and it is on track to be ready for the 1st of January.
Thanks both. That's very, very useful. Final specific question for NI GB trade is the definition of at risk of export from NI to the Republic. Question about whether that includes private purchases made in NI by private individuals who then take those goods as the final consumer into the Republic.
This is where the devil really is in the detail, and until we have that final definition agreed, I wouldn't be able to say what it does and doesn't include. Final consumption is, I think, the thing that we are focused on. So it all depends on the different types of goods and things. Some final consumption is definitely the end of the process, but some that final purchase definitely is not the end of that product's existence and ability to be traded. So the exact definition will be needed before we can delve into what exactly it will involve.
Thanks very much, Alex. Thank you, Ryan. One last question for you, Alex, that's just come in, which is about declarations of weights. So something like waste paper, for example, has variable weights, and those can't be known before you actually load the goods. And so the question is, can commercial invoices include estimates until weight is confirmed by the end consumer?
I think this goes slightly more into technical detail than I can answer satisfactorily, unfortunately. So I think it will be as it is when it comes to normal GB to EU trade. Okay,
thanks. I mean, I think what we'll do, Alex, if you don't mind, we'll take that one offline, and it may well be that one of your colleagues will be better able to respond to that. And I do understand that the detail is evolving, but unfortunately, with the UK being a very significant exporter of recovered paper for recycling, this is an issue that's going to arise on the 1st of January for somebody. So if we'll take that one offline, and we'll see if we can pursue with you or your colleagues a response to that. Brilliant. So thank you very much, both Alex, for your presentation, and Alex and Ryan together for asking the questions. That's been incredibly helpful. What I'd like to do now, if I may, is to hand over to our next speaker, our third speaker this morning. We're very, very happy to have with us Dave Taylor from Encase. Dave is the Encase Group Procurement Manager. He has a lot of responsibilities for cross-Irish Sea trade, and particular for trade issues with the Republic of Ireland. And really, as a counterpoint to Alex's presentation, Dave is going to give us an update on the issues he sees from the industry perspective, as to what's going to be important for trade with the Republic of Ireland and what issues are going to need to be resolved by industry. So thank you very much, Alex and Ryan. And if I could now hand over to Dave for your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. Over the course of the next 15 to 20 minutes, I just want to give you a sort of overview of my perception of where businesses need to be in terms of the 1st of January. And from that, hopefully would fill in some of the gaps of where you are now and where we have been as well. Can I have the next slide, Katie, please? So 3 years in the making, many words thrown at us throughout of it that we're not really unsure of. But what we do know is from the 1st of January 2021, we will be entering into a new era that we need to be prepared for. So this next set of slides just really isolates what we need to be doing or what we should be doing now to be prepared. Next slide, Katie, please. So this shows the before and after. So international exports and imports pre-January the 1st and post-January the 1st, no change. It's exactly the same procedure of where you are right now. The difference being that the European Union import and exports, whilst before January the 1st, there's no documentation required normally, and freedom of movement of trade applies. But from January the 1st, we have a whole new set of rules and things that we need to be doing to prepare for any import and export of goods with the European Union. In terms of customs clearances, documents are going to be required in terms of licenses if you've got controlled goods. You don't really need a license for any uncontrolled goods, and the certificate of origin is going to be needed that we don't currently do. And then depending on the trade deal that we end up with, the tariff codes or commodity codes will be implemented. And then also depending on the trade deal, duty may be payable, may not be payable. It just solely depends on which way we end up going with whichever trade deal. Next slide, Katie, please. So to import goods from the EU, what we must have is, if we haven't already, we need to have an OIRI number. The Economic Operators Registration and Identification Number is assigned to importers and exporters by the HMRC and is used in the process of customs entry declarations and customs clearance, both import and export shipments travelling to and from the EU and outside the EU. I will go into this a little bit more on another slide down, but as an importer and an exporter, it's not just about your OIRI number, your GB OIRI number. If you're exporting into the Republic of Ireland, to do that, you would need to do full declarations. You would need to have an Ireland OIRI number as well as a VAT number out there to do full declaration. You must be VAT registered and have a VAT deferment account to pay your duties and your VAT. Customs declaration on import, you've got options. You can submit a full declaration at the time of goods entering the UK or EU, or if you're putting them into a temporary storage, or use simplified declarations processes. Also, on top of that, we need to decide, or you need to decide, whether to do the customs clearance yourself or use a customs agent. Completing all the customs declaration can be very complicated and time consuming. You will need software to do it, and how I've found, you will need to get somebody to deal customs for you. Most declarations are submitted electronically through customs handling of import and export and freight chief, which I know we've discussed about CDS for Ireland and probably CDS being the way forward. But for now, Chief will be the process that gets done. You'll also need training and on software that links into Chief. Just so that for ease, and the slides are available at the end. I've put links on there for you to go straight to, you know, if you want if you've not registered for OIRI just yet, there's a link there to take you straight to the site, to the HMRC site, so that you can register. Also, access for Chief and access for HMRC third-party software. Next slide, please, Katie. Thank you. If you don't plan to do the customs clearance yourself, then you need to choose a suitable customs agent with the expertise required to do customs declarations for you. I think in my process of half a dozen agents, the prices range quite significantly. Well, not significantly. I mean, it's £50 per declaration to anywhere up to £80 per declaration. What I've found is this scale changes depending on the volume of declarations that you anticipate. It seems to be one of the criteria that the agents ask you for. What's the volume that you're likely to be putting through us? With regards to licenses as well, these are going to be required for import and export. If you import goods that are not controlled into the Great Britain or from the EU, you can record the goods in your own records without getting authorization in advance. But if the goods are on the list below, you must follow normal rules for making import declaration. Uncontrolled goods, no license required. And I've listed a number of examples there of what controlled goods are, and a link there to the full list of the controlled goods. Now, from a paper and packaging point of view, my belief is uncontrolled goods, but waste and the sale of waste, I believe, would be under license, so it could be a controlled. Next slide, please, Katie. So, custom freight simplified procedure. There are two types of CFSP authorisation. The simplified declaration procedure is used for releasing goods at the frontier to most customs procedures, and which may be useful if you're importing perishable goods. The second one is entry into the declarations records, EIDR. A declaration is made in the trader's records rather than directly to the HMRC, releasing them to customs procedures. Following completion of a simplified frontier declaration to a customs procedure containing minimum details, you remove the goods from the frontier. The benefits of doing CFSP to you: it gains accelerated release of your goods through customs at the air or at the ports and authorised locations inland, subject to anti-smuggling checks. Use CFP, SFP in combination with normal entry and warehouse procedures to suit the needs of your business. It achieves cash flow benefits. The duty and import VAT are not paid until the supplementary declaration is submitted. What that means is from the 1st of January for 6 months under the simplified procedure, your declarations can be submitted into your own records, which is a kind of HMRC Excel spreadsheet requiring information. What that allows you to do is make your own declarations. You'd be given a simplified frontier declaration registration number, which you would then put that to your paperwork, which would allow when any of your goods coming into the UK for import, would allow that to freely pass through, also subject to the checks. Full link there on access to the simplified procedures application. It looks quite daunting, but the last 10 pages are just simply how to do it. And that Use the third-party service provider to submit electronic declarations for you. You know, I've found that this is probably going to be a must for most people, because most people just won't have the expertise and the personnel and the time to do it. So I think that's where most people end up. Next slide, Katie. So what information do I need for declaring UK imports? UK ORI number. You know, we've already mentioned that a number of times, that you're going to need that if you haven't already. That complies with also a full importer's company name and registered address. This will be the company's trading name and VAT registered address. Full list of commodity codes. These are 8 to 10 digit. 8 digits are normally the codes from the EU on imports, and exports is 8 digit, imports will be the 10 digit codes. What this does, this identifies what the goods are and what the liabilities or restrictions that may apply on import. What I've found with this is that you will need to have a full risk assessment and a full assessment of all of the products that you bring in to the UK from EU. Everything will now have a commodity code aligned to it. Anything that you export out of the UK, it's your responsibility to classify and code your goods correctly. I'll touch on that right at the very end because I have done some work that for you. Customs procedure codes. This is a 7-digit procedure code which determines how the goods are being declared and if there is a form of customs control being used on import. You'll also need a copy of the bill of lading. This confirms the parties involved, the description of the goods and the quantities within the trade or the import. Also backed up with a commercial invoice showing Incoterms of sale. We are going to touch on Incoterms in a slide or two's down because this part is, there are changes and a lot of people's contracts with suppliers and customers will need to be verified and checked so that you're not caught doing full declarations or anything. Confirmation of clearance quantities. Although we may have a bill of lading, you may only be responsible for clearing smaller parcels than shown, so we would need to know what quantities you wish to clear. And shipping details and mode of transport. This details how the goods are arriving, their ETA, and when they'll be discharged. Generally, any imports you should really be uploading into the HMRC 24 hours before they're due to come over. That should then ease or hopefully ease the transition or the smooth transition through customs into the UK. Next slide, please. Thank you. Again, we've touched on this on the last two, the chief being the main system to be used. It may be that this is moving over to CDS, but right now for the UK, Chief will be the import declaration system. Chief will grant permission to discharge and move the cargo or advise HMRC if a query or desired to inspect the goods. That's effectively the only 5 outcomes from Chief about your goods, and it'll be about the information you put in that will spill out what route or what desire on the goods coming through that will be given. The permission is known on a printout from Chief, known as the DTI EX20XH. Next slide, Katie, please. Okay, Incoterms. From the 1st of January, Incoterms 2020 will be the only used set of terms for trading. There's a slight change to the Incoterms list. DDP and X Works are probably the least favourable Incoterms to use, because it basically outlines under DDP that your responsibility and your risk in the trade. DPU has been changed from DAT. So the income terms are international commercial terms that are used worldwide for international trade of goods. They clearly communicate the responsibilities between a seller and buyer in regards to risk, cost, risks associated with the global transportation process. What I've found here is that, especially with trade into Ireland, pre-January, the Incoterms that you have on your contracts or what you do were not necessarily relevant. If you've got DDP on a lot of your contracts out, that means now that you're responsible for the import, the export and the import into the country that you're trading with. So the Incoterms especially are something that you need to get the analysis done on with the terms of your contracts and your customers, your suppliers, sorry. Yeah, next slide please, Katie. So what I've done is put a list of key information for packaging, imports and exports, based around the commodity codes for corrugated packaging. So for all corrugated box producers, the 10-digit commodity code being 481910 and then 4 zeros is the only commodity code that you would need in the export of your goods, and that is also in relation to your UK customers as well, because you don't know what those customers are going to do with those boxes after. If you're a seller of sheet as well, corrugated sheet board, standard sheet, the 480700 and 4 zeros is what you would need. And if you sell coated corrugated sheet, the 4810 followed by zeros is the other code you'd need. So to get your codes, it is your responsibility and your responsibility alone to classify your goods. But the classification, as long as you've got logical reason to get to those codes, then that should be fine. And with regards to your classification, I've viewed these with the DIT, and we've gone through them, and the justification or the to get to these codes was deemed as being the right method to use. So you may already have these in place, you may not, but this should sort of give clarity on what you should be using and what you should not be using. CPC codes, customs procedure code. If you use CFSP, simplified inward processing, you have one code that you would need to use on all of your products. The other two codes for goods imported under inward processing, the code is there for you, and for goods being returned under both, the code is there for you. One thing that I know we've already discussed as well that is still under review at the moment is the use of heat treated pallets for imports and exports. I think there's some clarity still to be reviewed around that, but hopefully in the coming days or weeks that we will get that information. But yeah, hopefully that will give you as much information that it can, and a bit of guidance. Links are there to take you to where you need to be. And thanks for listening. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Dave. That's absolutely excellent. I'm just wanting to check. There's a slight echo on the line. I don't know whether maybe someone needs to go on to me. I think that's gone now. That's great. Thank you. So there's one question here, particularly, Dave, on Incoterms, which is the treatment of VAT under delivered duty paid. Is there anything that you can add to that at this stage?
Yeah, under DDP, you're responsible for the VAT. So if you're trading with Republic of Ireland and you're exporting boxes out to Republic of Ireland, under DDP, you would be responsible for the export and the import of those goods. To do that, you will need OIRI numbers in the UK, also an OIRI number in any country, EU country, that you're trading with. So it's not just Ireland, it could be France, it could be Germany. You need to have that. And you would then also need to have a VAT, a registered address, registered VAT and VAT deferment in those countries. That's why the Incoterms needs to be looked at within anything that you're doing right now, because DDP will catch you out.
Thank you, Dave. I've got another couple of questions here, both on the same issue, which is free of charge goods. Now, I don't know whether this is something that you would be able to answer, Dave, or whether Alex potentially might also have the answer to, but it's particularly about what happens if you're moving goods that are free of charge between EU and UK.
Honestly, not 100%. When you look at the list of Incoterms, with the FCA, the free of charge, the FCA, it was the FCA, wasn't it, free of charge?
Well, I think this, to my mind, Dave, this question is referring to goods that actually don't have a price.
Yeah, but you'll still need to follow an import-export procedure to do that. You will also need to have a set of Incoterms, because even if the goods are valued at zero, I presume you will still have something to do.
Dave, I see Ryan's wanting to come in on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, just sorry to come in. I've seen this in the questions, so I've one other questioner has actually pointed out the relevant guidance as well. So this is something I have to double check, but you can't, if you have a good, you will need to assign a customs value to it. For import VAT and duty purposes, whether you're paying for it or not, is my understanding. The second questioner has included the relevant notice. I will, of course, double check this because that is my understanding, but I cannot find it in black and white. The notice itself kind of doesn't give you an option of not valuing the goods for customs purposes, so I suspect that tells us what we need to know. You need to assign a value, and if there's a duty on it, you need to pay the duty and import VAT accordingly, which of course you may claim back later. I guess we'll get into that in a bit. So just to say, I will chase that up, but my understanding is that essentially they're not leaving open that loophole, right, for people just to say, oh, it doesn't have a sales value, and put that in. I understand many things genuinely are given free, right? So I'm not suggesting anything dodgy is going on at all. But as I understand it, a customs value will need to be assigned using one of the methods in the notice that the second questioner has put up. But I will chase up with colleagues to get a definitive answer.
Thank you very much, Ryan. I think that's come to the end of the questions specifically on this issue. So thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Dave, in particular, for your presentation. If I could now move on to our well, firstly, just before we change to Ryan Diggory again for his presentation on border issues, if I could just remind people, it seems to be working very well today, but if people could please use the Q&A function in Teams to submit any questions that they have, that would be extremely helpful in making sure that we can capture them all. And if there are questions like, for example, estimated weights for recovered paper and free of charge movements where we can't quite find a definitive answer at the moment, we know we can take those away and then provide information as it comes to light. So I'd now like to invite Ryan back up to the microphone. He is going to be talking this time on some of the specific border related issues that are potentially going to come about as a result of the end of the Brexit transition period. So thank you very much again, Ryan, for speaking today, and over to you.
Thanks again, Andrew, and thanks to Dave as well for a really good presentation there. Owing to the fact that Dave has discussed a number of things that normally would be covered when talking about the border operating model as a whole, I'm not going to repeat loads of those messages, but it is absolutely important, first of all, to think about your terms. Those are the rules from which all of the other responsibilities flow in a supply chain. It is absolutely sensible to pick up, especially where people are going to be responsible for interacting with EU authorities as well as UK authorities, and I'll go into that a little bit later as well. And I'm also going to touch upon some of the other issues, just some questions for you and some additional links in the slides for you to take away that you should really be thinking about alongside all of the customs type issues we're really discussing in detail today. I know there has been some discussions about heat treated pallets, and hopefully those can be picked up a little bit later. My understanding is very much that the EU will have a legal requirement for ISPM 15 on pallets that are going into the EU from the UK after the 1st of January, so do be ready for that. I think there's been a lot of work with the timber industry more broadly to try and increase the number of treated pallets in circulation. Hopefully we could get an update on Northern Ireland as well. My understanding there is that there will be requirements, as Northern Ireland is effectively, because it's on the island of Ireland's sanitary and phytosanitary zones, so animal and plant health zone. I would suspect that the same requirements will exist in law for that trade as well, but obviously we'll get confirmation on those points. I'm afraid on the question on weights, may have to go and get some further clarification there. I have been trying to find the relevant guidance in between, but sadly I've not managed to. I suspect it's a case of best endeavours and different methods for estimating weight that you can use, but obviously we'll need to go and get that covered. And I think just to cover off a few questions that are coming while we're here. So Steve has asked about internal company transfers. So he's saying, so X paper builds, X the same ownership. I suspect this question is about if it's an internal movement of goods within a company, is there a difference in the customs requirements, VAT and so on across the UK EU border? And sadly, Steve, the answer is no. You will, it doesn't matter whether it's an internal company transfer or transfer between two different companies over the border will apply to movements of those goods either way. So I understand that leads to an awful lot more work within organisations, especially if you're shifting different materials within the organisation, but the border will be in place whatever happens. So you will need to make declarations on those goods and think about treating them much the same way as you would treat a business-to-business transfer. And yes, obviously aware that that is not something that you would probably have been wishing for in terms of your internal procedures. Next slide, please, Katie. Let's get into the next bit of the presentation. So just a quick reminder, I think we covered this at the last session on the 6th of November, but it is important to note, especially I guess in and a non-negotiated outcome. Obviously, we hope to have a free trade agreement in place that enables any import tariffs on imports from the EU to the UK to be avoided. However, the default tariff rates that will apply have been published in the UK global tariff. So if you haven't looked at those to see what would be paid as a default, and as I say, I hope it won't have to be in terms of EU imports, then please do follow through on that link on screen at the moment. And I get a few questions about the codes that are involved there. The tool for checking the UK global tariff only tends to give you 8-digit level codes, whereas people know you have to, for your import declarations, they're all at 10-digit level of detail. That's just a case of this tool not showing the additional level of detail where the tariff rates are exactly the same. So if you were worried about that issue, all it means is that all of the 10-digit codes within the 8-digit one you're looking at through the tool have the same tariff treatment, so they haven't been listed separately because they say the same thing. So that's all that means. I've just had a few questions in the last week or two on that in particular. So if that was about to trip off your tongue, hopefully that helps. Next slide, please. So wanted to touch upon VAT in particular. Sadly, I am not a VAT consultant or expert, but I think it is important for us to think about this. Dave very clearly made the point about delivered duty paid terms, and that is really, really important. If your Incoterms are landing you, for example, responsible for EU import VAT, you really need to take actions straight away in order to remain compliant. For example, you're a UK exporter and you're exporting delivery duty paid to the EU. You will, in most cases, in most member states, including all of the ones that we commonly send our goods through, so France, Belgium, Holland, Germany, so on, need a fiscal representative as well. So it's really worth bearing that in mind. And indeed, as we discussed previously, perhaps trying to negotiate with any partners in the EU that they can be responsible for the EU VAT side as well, as it is obviously much easier if you are established within the EU to do that. For imports into the UK, hopefully you've all seen this, and we don't need to go over it at length, but postponed VAT accounting will be available to all imports into the UK. This isn't just from the EU. This is imports from the rest of the world as well. So all businesses that are VAT registered will be able to just account for all import VAT on their quarterly returns, for example. And that also means if you're claiming input tax, you can account for that at the same time on your return. So it should improve cash flow for a number of traders as well. If you're choosing to defer your customs declarations on imports from the EU, and a reminder, you can only do that on the EU imports, not on the imports from China, US or wherever else, then you will have to use postponed VAT accounting for all of that trade that you're bringing in and deferring customs declarations on. So that's important to bear in mind as well. There's a link there in the first paragraph on screen that will take you to the guidance on how to make use of postponed VAT accounting. If you haven't done that so far and you're importing goods, please look at that as soon as possible. I've then added in some links on EU procedures as well. This is for the people who are landed in a position where perhaps they're delivering duty paid into France, Netherlands or wherever else. If you are in that situation, again, I think the first bit of advice is to try to negotiate something else. That's not going to be possible for everyone. Member states do have different rules for collecting and reclaiming VAT. As I've said, many of them require fiscal representation if you're not established in that country. So there is some guidance there that should be helpful for people who are landed in that position. Hopefully that's a fairly small group of people, but it is absolutely something that's important to have in place because you don't want there to be any problems on day one with VAT. Next slide, please. So what I've done here, just for the next few slides, and apologies if this is tedious, it doesn't quite capture the right things, but I've included some, because we've covered a fair bit of ground in Dave's presentation so far, I've just included here some FAQs, so things that have certainly been asked of me at presentations like this over the last month or two, and things that HMRC are getting asked questions on quite frequently as well. So I thought it'd be helpful to touch upon some of them. So the first one is about duty deferment accounts and guarantees. This is really important. So let's look at imports using stage controls from January to July next year. So if you're choosing to make use of that facilitation, as has been outlined already this morning, someone, so forwarders can provide this role for you, will have to have a deferment account in place in order for that declaration to be deferred, and therefore any duty that might be due alongside it. So it is definitely a recommendation for importers in the UK to have a duty deferment account in place, but it is possible in the very short term, if your freight forwarder or customs agent is willing to use their firstly their simplified declarations authorization and also their deferment accounts as well. You can pay for that service. You are recommended for use in the future to apply to HMRC for a duty deferment account. In the past, duty deferment accounts have had a requirement for customs comprehensive guarantees. HMRC has introduced a new waiver system, so that for the majority of businesses, those where intelligence or previous late payments or whatever mean that they can't make use of it, for businesses there is now a waiver process. So there's a link on screen there that will tell you more about that. So it absolutely is a recommendation, but it is not absolutely mandatory for continuing to import. You can do it, you can import without it, you just have to pay up front, or use a customs agents or freight forwarders version, which of course would involve additional costs in most circumstances. Next slide, please. Similarly on VAT, so just to rehash this a little bit, so there is a link there on screen which will tell you how and when you can account for import VAT on your VAT return. So as I've said, postponed VAT accounting is available to all VAT registered traders for all imports into the UK from 1st January onwards, whether from the EU or from elsewhere in the world. Now, if a business defers a declaration, as I've said, they'll have to use postponed VAT accounting. In that case, they're going to have to account for the import VAT on their periodic return. This is often quarterly for a large number of businesses. This means that in the initial instance, you'll just have to make an estimate of the import VAT due, and then you'll have to revise that estimate at the time of making your VAT return so that it's accurate. So there will be further guidance on the ins and outs of that that are coming out very soon, because traders will have to use the valuation system HMRC is putting in place. Just like current certificates for import VAT, when you provide a statement, you'll have to provide the evidence needed to claim input tax. The evidence requirements for claiming input tax will be the same as they are for claiming it on imports from the rest of the world at the moment. So it is important to look at that as well. Obviously, if you're processing something and sending it on, you should be able to reclaim import VAT because you're not supplying the good to end consumers. So it is very much worth doing some research there to avoid any cash flow issues that might come about as a result of the fact that, as I said at the start, the UK and the EU will be separate VAT zones. So import VAT is going to have to be accounted for on all trade between the two parties from the 1st of January onwards. Next slide, please. Someone asked about this earlier. You clocked onto the fact that there will be yet another new IT system for road freight, and that's called GVMS, or Goods Vehicle Movement Service. So I put here the question, what is it and when will it be used from? So GVMS is a new system. What it essentially enables HMRC to do is to link together all of the different declarations that are required for an import or an export into one system that enables a haulier to provide a movement reference number and barcode to customs staff, which enables smooth traffic or smooth flow of goods vehicle traffic, right? So the whole point of it is to collect the different declarations that are required on trade from the 1st of January, push them together into one system so that hauliers have a very simple reference point that enables checks and things like that on whether goods consignments are compliant with customs arrangements to be much, much quicker. It'll be used, so ports, again, frustratingly, have not all said what systems they're going to be using from the 1st of January onwards. Obviously, this is an important bit of information that HMRC needs to get out to traders quite quickly. But essentially, you can expect that these systems, so-called pre-lodgement systems, where customs declarations have to be made in advance and is collected in this new IT system, to be in place for most roll-on, roll-off road freight traffic and ports from midway through next year onwards. So the system is not going to be used for most trade in 1st of January. So someone asked about readiness. The system will be ready, HMRC confirm, for all freight going on to the pre-lodgement customs model. So this will effectively, although it's open to ports' discretion whether they use it or not, it'd be probably applicable to the majority of roll-on, roll-off road freight from July 2021 onwards. Some of you may be aware that for exports through the short straits, of things called the Kent Access Pass and the Check and HGV is ready to move service. Those are essentially sort of short-term export-focused versions of this new service that are in place for a very specific purpose, and that is keeping road freight moving through Dover, the Channel Tunnel, from 1st of January onwards. So 2 separate systems, but doing some of the same things. And GVMS will be in place, as I said, for certain very specific things like movements under the transit procedure from the 1st of January onwards. But for most freight that's going to use it, roll-on, roll-off road freight, although subject to ports actually saying that they're using this model, and it is their commercial decision, it should be in place from the 1st of July onwards, I should say. Next slide, please. Been questions about this as well. So IT platforms, essentially what HMRC has done is put a lot more capacity into Chief so that it can still continue to be used for the majority of GB EU trade from 1st of January. Unfortunately, for one reason or another, CDS rollout has not meant that system will be used for that trade. So Chief is going to remain, is essentially going to run alongside the new CDS system for a while everyone beds into using the new procedures, especially because there's just a huge volume of declarations that are going to be required that have not been required in the past. All of that trade between Great Britain and the EU. So HMRC is going to be all new traders going to be put onto Chief for the time being. As Alex said earlier, for Northern Ireland trade, CDS is what's going to be used. NI to rest of the world imports, for those who are concerned about that, are going to remain on Chief. And as I've just said, GB to EU and rest of the world exports are going to remain on Chief as well. And HMRC will obviously communicate into next year what's going to happen after that. But this essentially is to try to smooth the transition a little bit and uprate the Chief system and carry on using it dually alongside CDS. For most of you, this is something that might be good to know, but hopefully a lot of you will have your freight forwarders and customs agents who are the ones who are going to interact with this stuff for you. The information provided to either system is almost exactly the same. So from your point of view, it really is about just checking with your freight forwarder or customs agent in most cases what they need from you, and keep it simple at that level. If you are doing your own declarations, obviously you will have to be well aware of which IT system to plug into for which bit of trade. Next slide, please. We get asked about delays a lot. I think the thing to say here is I doubt anyone knows exactly what delays would occur from the 1st of January. There is obviously a risk. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, there's no risk at all, it's absolutely all fine. Delays aren't going to occur. The thing to say from a government perspective is, obviously government's trying to do all sorts of things to decrease the chance of delays occurring and disrupting trade. We've spoken about people being able to defer declarations on imports. That's obviously one of the main measures the government's putting in place. I've touched upon things like the Kent Access Pass, which has been in place to try to prevent the ports being flooded by consignments of goods where customs clearance hasn't happened yet, so that they're not in the way of people who have declared all of the, or made all of the declarations they need to. So there are all sorts of measures that are going in place to try to limit the risk of delays occurring. However, of course, there's such a big change in such a short period of time that there may well indeed be disruption at ports. I think the main thing to say is work on your own compliance and that of your customers and suppliers in the EU, and really stick to what's in your control. And the government and Border Force and HMRC are doing everything they can to try to make the systems at ports operate, and also to try to ensure that people who have not done that work on getting compliance with procedures are not physically in the way of people who have done that work and are compliant. One last thing before go for a while. So what are we doing to improve support provided to businesses and the online guidance? As I've said, one of the reasons I'm here is to take feedback on where guidance is not quite detailed enough or is unclear to traders, so please do share that. I will just make a plug for a couple of new products. One of these has been mentioned already. So there is a new online forum HMRC's put together, which will have FAQs on some important areas. There's a link to that there. There's also a new online chat service. So if you do want to speak to HMRC about GB, EU, or indeed NI trade as well, please do check into that. And also, Alex mentioned this earlier, but for Northern Ireland in particular, there is a range of guidance available on the Northern Ireland Customs Academy website. So if you just go to that page and scroll down to the bottom, the guidance on the practicalities as they stand, and as Alex alluded to, unfortunately, we're still in a position where not all of the practicalities have been ironed out by negotiators, but hopefully should be soon. For all of the practical guidance that is able to be said with certainty, you can find it there. Next slide, please. I won't say anything on these other than we covered this very briefly at the last call on the 6th of November, but it is worth bearing in mind that customs special procedures, not just on deferred declarations, which is a really important one that Dave mentioned earlier, but on other things like being able to potentially avoid tariffs on raw material imports if you're processing them and exporting them again through processing, or if you're using the UK as a land bridge, looking at the Common Transit Convention. It really is important to think not just about the new obligations, but also how you can perhaps limit some of those obligations by using a special procedure. So I've included some links here on screen. Next slide, please. I've also included some questions for you on some of the areas we're not covering today. Things like REACH, for example. So if you're importing chemicals directly, as in not through a UK distributor, please do look at that guidance as soon as possible. It is perhaps not a day one action for most people who are downstream users, but it's something you need to be aware of. Also, if you or your customers are dealing with UKCA, CE marking, the relevant guidance for EU, GB and Northern Ireland market access is on screen, and there's some other important guidance there as well, including on moving notified waste between the UK and EU, which is the link at the bottom. Next slide, please. Some other things we're not mentioning today. I thought it was worth including some high-level links to guidance for personal data. So as mentioned before, until the EU says the UK has adequacy regime, which we should, because it's the same one the EU has, it's absolutely identical, it's GDPR. Until the EU has actually made that, you do need to check especially if you're, for example, multinational with HR records moving between the EU and UK, particularly from the EU to UK, there's no problem in the other direction. And please do check that link at the top of the screen. And there's also some other links there to guidance that may be of interest to you. One at the bottom on business travel, we mentioned when talking about a deal earlier, there will be changes to how to visa requirements and things like recognition of qualifications for people sending engineers between the UK and the EU. We're trying to limit the number of additional barriers people have to meet through negotiations, but many of them will be in place either way. So please do check the guidance on that. It's not all about moving goods, we're moving people as well. So please do make sure you're aware of how things might change for doing that. Next slide, please. Before I hand over, I have just noticed a couple of questions that have come up. So one anonymous asks about whether it's a deferment account. I've just been told off actually in an email from HMRC about using the word deferment for VAT. Postponement is the word they want to use. So VAT postponement is a procedure that is very much separate from a duty deferment account and is something that is available to all VAT registered traders. You use your VAT return in order to do that. So it is a separate thing, yes. Confusingly though, you can use a deferment account to postpone import VAT as well, but it is a different thing. So a duty deferment account is a standalone thing that you use to defer duty. Obviously, as the name tells you, but also import VAT. It's normally something where you pay by direct debit on a monthly basis. VAT postponed accounting is something separate. That's for VAT registered traders only, and that is where you account. That's how you account for import VAT through a VAT return, right? So they are separate things. Unless Andrew, you've got something else coming up. Sorry, phone's going off in the background.
Ryan,
any other questions for now or for later, maybe?
Yeah, hi Ryan. There's one more question here for you, which I don't know whether you'd be able to ask, which is about the government's listing companies that provide customs brokerage along with fast parcel operators on their website. Are there plans to list companies that can offer fiscal representation?
I don't know. That's a really good question. It's one I'll look into. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know. Well, it could be in the works. Yeah, so that's something I'll look into. And also just to say that obviously fiscal representation in the EU as well is something that we're looking to get our colleagues at the Department for International Trade to be a bit more helpful with some pointers, perhaps from embassies in the EU as well. But in the meantime, I'm afraid it probably is best to do some independent research if you're looking for EU fiscal representatives, because you're going to need to do that very quickly. I'll check from the UK perspective, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. If you could check on that and let us know, then we can send out to participants. That would be great. I also have a question here for on the subject of carbon taxes, and in particular the future successor arrangements to EU ETS. Now, I know that we're lucky enough to have Arjen Haveke on the call. He's the Deputy Director for Energy Issues with responsibility for the paper industry in the Bays Department. And Arjen, could I hand over to you for a question to this one, please?
Sure. Not sure what I'm going to. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Arjen. Please go ahead. You're now live.
Good, thank you. It's still the government's position to introduce an emission trading system before the 1st of January. That's what the spending review confirmed. Obviously, the fallback option remains a carbon emission tax, but the objective is to have an ETS linked with the EU ETS. And all the necessary legislation to introduce that is being put forward into their parliament basically this month. So, but obviously it's linked to the whole trade negotiations as well. So I'm afraid again we have to wait and see until the outcome of these negotiations.
Thank you very much, Arjen. That's as good an update as I guess we can give at the moment, pending the negotiations and the future of those. So thank you, Ryan, for your very comprehensive presentations today. There's a lot of information there. I know you said before that we can share those presentations with participants, and we'll do that. And there's a lot of useful links in there for people to pick up on. I'm now very pleased to introduce our final speaker today. We're very lucky to have Adrian Hawkes here from the Office for Product Safety and Standards. He's an enforcement team leader there, and there are a number of timber related issues that we know are of importance for the UK's paper-based industries, and I'll be very pleased now to hand over to Adrian for his presentation on timber regulations issues post the end of the Brexit transition. So thank you, Adrian, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I'm just going to start sharing my screen, and hopefully the presentation will come up okay, but I'll be guided if there's any problem with that. Okay. Is my presentation showing up okay?
Not for me yet, Adrian, if we just want to hang on 1 second.
Sure. Seconds.
There we go.
Is it showing up now?
Not yet. Katie, are you going to take over here and share the slides, and then Adrian can ask you to advance them? I think that's the easiest thing to do.
Easier. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that.
So just bear with us, Adrian, for just a second
problem.
while Katie gets those slides up. Excellent.
Okay, terrific.
Okay, yeah, I think the slides are now visible for me, Adrian, so I think you're good to go.
Excellent, that's terrific. Okay, so we can move to the first slide, please, Katie. That would be great. So thanks everyone for the opportunity to speak to you today. As Andrew mentioned, I'm from the Office of Product Safety and Standards, and we're responsible for enforcing currently the European timber regulations and soon to be the UK timber regulations in the UK. What I want to talk about today is what the existing obligations are for certain categories of people under the timber regulations, and then look at what the new arrangements will be, firstly in Great Britain and secondly in Northern Ireland, as the arrangements will be different depending on which area is covered. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So I understand that the main question on people's mind will obviously be what the requirements are following the end of the transition period. But in order to understand what those changes will be and put them in some sort of context, I think it's useful to go over again what the existing requirements are, so that we understand what will remain the same and what will change. And I think that'll make it easier for an explanation of the changes that are coming in following the end of the transition period. So the timber regulations at the moment are designed, and the purpose of them is to prevent illegally harvested timber and timber products being placed on the EU market. There's an annex to that regulation which lists the products which are within scope of the regulation, and it lists those products by commodity code. Not all products made of timber are included in the scope, but if they are within scope and if the commodity code relating to that product is listed in the annex, then it falls within scope of the timber regulations. The regulations also creates obligations for two groups of people, operators and traders. An operator is a business who first places the product on the market, whereas a trader is a business who purchases a product which has already been placed on the market. There are due diligence requirements for operators, and I'll discuss those in a little bit more detail in the next slide. And I just want to flag two instances where a product will fall outside the scope of the timber regulations. So if a flag license accompanies the import, then the product won't be considered within the scope of the timber regulations. A flag license basically comes as a result of a voluntary partnership agreement between now the EU and subsequently the UK and another country. And currently the only VPA which has flagged licenses attached to it is Indonesia. So if you're importing timber from Indonesia and it's got a flagged license, you won't need to carry out due diligence on the product. And the other instance where a product falls outside the scope of EUTR is where it has a CITES permit attached to the product. And in both those cases, in flagged and CITES, the timber is considered to be legal and therefore no further action is required by people placing those products on the market. Next slide, please, Katie. So, as I mentioned, the timber regulations creates obligations for two categories of people, operators and traders. An operator, so a business that places a product on the market for the first time, must exercise due diligence when placing the timber or timber products on the market and maintain and regularly evaluate that due diligence system. And I'll discuss in the next slide a little bit what's involved in carrying out due diligence. Secondly, traders, as I said, they're businesses who are purchasing a timber product that's already been placed on the market. So they're not clearing it through customs, they're not putting it on the market for the first time, it's already been placed on the market. And their obligations under the regulations are simply to identify the operators or traders who supply the timber or timber products to them, and where applicable, identify the traders or to whom they've subsequently supplied that timber or timber product. Could I have the next slide, please, Katie? So, as I mentioned earlier, the purpose of the regulations is to prevent illegally harvested timber being placed on the market. The main obligation that this creates for operators is to have in place a due diligence system which ensures that the risk of illegally harvested timber being placed on the market is negligible. In order to do this, in order to put together a compliant due diligence system, there are three key components that need to be included. First is access to information. So this is understanding your supply chain, understanding and having the documentation that accounts for the movement of the timber or timber product from the point of harvest through to the point that it's been placed on the market. The second aspect of this is the risk assessment, so understanding and assessing the risk of illegally harvested timber entering your supply chain. And lastly, risk mitigation. So where you've done a risk assessment and the risk assessment is not negligible, or that the risk is not negligible, that you undertake mitigating actions to ensure that you reduce that risk to negligible, or quite simply, you shouldn't be placing the product on the market. Could I have the next slide, please, Katie? So I want to discuss now what the position will be following the end of the transition period. So from the 1st of January 2021, Great Britain, so that's Scotland, England and Wales, will have its own timber regulations. Northern Ireland will remain subject to the European timber regulations as set out in the Withdrawal Agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol. So there'll be separate arrangements in place for Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I'll talk firstly about what those requirements are in Great Britain and then address Northern Ireland later in the presentation. So two key questions about what will happen following the end of the transition period are who will have obligations under the timber regulations in Great Britain, and secondly, what will those obligations be? So the answer to the first question, who will have obligations under the new timber regulations, is that it will continue to be operators and traders. However, the definition will change slightly. So under EUTR, an operator was a business that placed timber on the EU market for the first time, whereas under UKTR, the UK timber regulations, the definition of an operator will be a business who places a product on the GB market for the first time. Similarly, with a trader, previously under EUTR, it was about a company that had purchased a timber product that was already placed on the EU internal market, whereas now a trader will be someone who's buying or selling a product that's already been placed on the GB market. So the main change is really in relation to the which market the product has been placed on, and obviously we're now dealing under UKTR, we're now dealing with the GB market as against the common market. But otherwise, the definition of an operator and a trader remains the same. An operator is still the person who places it on the market for the first time, and a trader is someone who purchases a product which has already been placed on the market. Can you have the next slide, please, Katie? So, as I mentioned, the second question about obligations under the new timber regulations is what are the obligations for operators and traders under the new legislation. So put very simply, they remain the same as they did under the previous EUTR regulation. The only difference is that the scope changes from the EU to GB. So operators must continue to exercise due diligence when placing products on the GB market. The due diligence that they have to carry out follows exactly the same format and exactly the same threshold as the existing due diligence requirements. So there's no change in that respect. Operators still need to undertake a risk assessment to ensure that the risk of illegally harvested timber being placed on the market and entering their supply chain is negligible. For traders, it remains a question of identifying who the operator or trader was who supplied them with the timber in the first place. So the key change, as I said, is really in relation to the relevant market, moving from the EU to the GB market. The due diligence and the components of having a compliant due diligence system remain exactly the same. Next slide, please. So I want to speak very briefly about businesses exporting to the EU. So this obviously lies outside our area of enforcement, but I understand it will be relevant for some businesses who have markets in the EU. In the same way as businesses based in GB will become, and who are importing from the EU, will become operators at the end of the transition period, EU businesses importing from companies in GB will become operators at the end of the transition period as well. And this means that in order for them to comply with EUTR, they will need to carry out due diligence and may therefore request more documentation from the GB suppliers in order for them to demonstrate compliance for their competent authority in the EU. I won't say more on this just now because the question of enforcement of EUTR in the EU obviously lies with the competent authorities there, but it's just one to flag with businesses who do have markets in the EU. Can you have the next slide, please? So, as I mentioned earlier, under EUTR, if a timber product is accompanied by either a FLEG license or a CITES permit, it's considered legal under EUTR and the operator doesn't need to undertake due diligence on the product or the associated supply chain. This will remain the case under UKTR. And the reason for that is with FLEGT, a VPA or a voluntary partnership has been agreed between the UK and Indonesia, and this will come into effect at the end of the transition period. This will allow FLEG licenses to be issued for products being exported from Indonesia to the UK. However, the agreement is separate from the EU-Indonesia voluntary partnership agreement. So FLEG licenses issued for export to the UK will only apply to imports that are direct between Indonesia and the UK. If the FLEG license is issued for import to a European member state, and then it comes onto the UK or onto the GB market rather, it will need to be subject to due diligence. The product will need to be subject to due diligence by the operator in GB because it's gone through a third country. CITES, on the other hand, is a multilateral agreement which is not dependent on the UK's membership of the EU, and so products that are accompanied by a CITES permit will continue to be considered legal under UKTR, and operators placing those on the market won't need to undertake due diligence for them. Could I have the next slide, please, Katie? So, as I mentioned earlier, the arrangements for Northern Ireland are different from those in Great Britain. And I just want to take some time to explain how this is the case and how it will work in practice. So Northern Ireland will be covered by the Northern Ireland Protocol, which means that Northern Ireland will continue to be regulated under the European timber regulations. I'll talk through some of what that means in the next slide and what the practical effects of that are. In terms of enforcement of those regulations, of the European timber regulations in Northern Ireland, OPSS, that's us, will continue to be responsible for enforcement in both Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So in Great Britain, we'll be enforcing the UK timber regulations, and in Northern Ireland, we'll be enforcing the European timber regulations. Could I have the next slide, please? So what does all this mean in practical terms? So essentially, there are 4 scenarios that I want to look at in a little bit more detail. So timber moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. If a business in Northern Ireland brings in a timber product from Great Britain, the business in Northern Ireland will need to undertake due diligence to ensure that they're able to comply with the due diligence requirements under the European timber regulations. This modifies the existing position and means that there will be a new process at the end of the transition period for businesses in Northern Ireland to follow if they are sourcing products from a company in Great Britain. Secondly, for timber moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, if a business in Great Britain brings in a timber product from Northern Ireland, there will be no new checks. This is to give effect to the Northern Ireland Protocol, which says that there will be no new checks on goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. This replicates the position today and means that there will be no change to existing arrangements at the end of the transition period if a business in Great Britain is sourcing products from Northern Ireland. The third scenario is timber moving from the European Union into Great Britain, and this is what I spoke about at more length in some of the earlier slides. But if a business in Great Britain imports timber from an EU member state, that business is an operator and will need to undertake due diligence in order to comply with the requirements of the UK timber regulations. And this modifies the existing position and means that there will be a new process in place for businesses in Great Britain at the end of the transition period. The final scenario is timber moving from the EU to Northern Ireland. If a business in Northern Ireland buys timber or purchases timber that has already been placed on the EU market, the business is considered to be a trader. That replicates the position today and means that there will be no new change to the existing arrangements at the end of the transition period. If we could have the next slide, please, Katie. So in terms of organising and preparation in advance of the transition period, hopefully that outline has been useful. We do have a number of resources on our website and on various other forums, and what I'll do is after the presentation I'll circulate a more direct list of links that might be useful for businesses to tap into. But just to touch on a couple of those points briefly, we have a LinkedIn group that people can join, and that gives us a way of obviously communicating reports or changes fairly quickly. But our website will be updated with guidance shortly, and as soon as that's available, our website will be updated to reflect the guidance that accompanies the UK timber regulations. And then, as always, there are a number of resources that are available through that to understand more about how to undertake risk assessments, how to engage with the regulations, and make sure that that's clear. But that is the end of my presentation, and certainly more than happy to take any questions that might have come up in the meantime.
Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. That's really, really interesting and useful coverage of the issues. There's obviously been a large number of questions coming in on the issue of heat treatment of pallets, which is of great importance to, I think, all commodity traders. Now, I understand that you're not exactly the person who's the policy lead on this, so I would be grateful if you could get a quick response back from your members. But what I would say is our current understanding is that for UK to EU trade and for GB to NI trade, but not, I hasten to add, for NI to GB trade, that pallets would need to be ISPM 15 marked, so either heat or chemical treated. And our understanding is that those pallets cost something of the order of £1 extra over and above the unmarked pallets. So that's our latest understanding of the situation. But if you could update on that, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does, as you mentioned, Andrew, it does lie outside our area, and so I don't have an authoritative answer to give. But it did come up in a webinar that I was participating in last week, and I'll follow up through the channels to try and get a more definitive response, or at least point in the right direction of one for you.
No, thank you very much, Adrian. I also have a question here about when and where can people access the commodity codes that are covered by the new timber regulations?
Okay, so the legislation and the links to the legislation will publish the information on that at the end when we've got the guidance up on our website. But in terms of and it will be included in the guidance itself. But in order for people to be clear on this in advance, we're not changing the list of products covered by the regulations when the new regulations come into effect. That's to say, the coverage of products in Annex 1 of the European timber regulations will be replicated in the UK timber regulations when they come into effect. So the simplest thing in the meantime is to check Annex 1 of the European timber regulations, and it will be exactly the same products that are covered in the UK timber regulations.
Thank you, Adrian. That's very clear. And I have one more question here from Anonymous. And I would say just at this point, if people are wanting a particular customized response from us or from the civil service speakers today, please could you use the Q&A to let us have your contact details, and we can get back in touch with you. Otherwise, we will be sending out material to all participants. But if there's a particular customized issue that you want to enter into a debate with, then please do let us know. The final question just for this section is about recycled material. Obviously, there's a lot of material, both recycled board, recycled paper and so on, that is traded by our members. And I wonder if you could clarify the position with regard to recycled materials.
Yes, of course. So there is, by way of preamble, there is guidance specifically relating to recycled material and end-of-life products, and that guidance we will be carrying over into our legislation. In terms of what the content of that is, essentially it deals with products which would otherwise have been discarded as waste or have reached the end of their life cycle. In those cases, if you are importing or placing a product on the market and would otherwise be required to undertake due diligence on that product, but that product is recycled, then it will generally fall outside the scope of the regulations and you won't be required to undertake due diligence on that. The qualifiers on that are two that I'll refer to now. Firstly, the product has to have reached in addition to it being recycled, it also has to have reached the end of its life cycle and would have otherwise been discarded as waste. So when you're looking at reclaimed wood from a building that was being demolished, or something else that was going to be discarded otherwise, that would fit the criteria of the exemption under the regulations. We've had cases where products have been technically recycled, but they don't fall outside scope because they hadn't reached the end of their life cycle and they hadn't undergone any kind of real transformation of the product itself. So a good example was oak barrels, which were used for distilling alcohol and had been used in one country, and they were imported and placed on the market in the UK. And because they hadn't undergone any transformation, it was just second-hand. It wasn't so much that the product itself had been recycled in a way that changed the fundamental character or the nature of the product. But if it is undergoing some transformation and that previous product had reached the end of its life cycle, then it would be included. And so the second point just to note with that, and the second qualifier, is that if a product is partly recycled and would meet the requirements to be exempt from the requirements of due diligence, but not all the product is recycled. So if you've got a piece of furniture where, for example, the surface of the table is recycled, but the legs are not, then you'll still need to undertake due diligence on the parts of the product which are not recycled. So the exemption only applies to the component parts of the product which are recycled.
Thank you, Adrian. And so just to be clear, recycled paper that has gone through a very substantial transformation process from a recovered cardboard box or newspaper, repulped, remade into paper and then shipped for export, that would clearly be outside of scope.
Yes, if it's all based on material which has reached the end of its life cycle, and then not all paper is included in scope anyway, so there's we would consider that out of scope. That's right.
No, thank you very much, Adrian. Yeah, no, thank you, Adrian. That's
thank you.
Come to the end of the specific questions for this session. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
We're now coming to the point of the webinar where we've got a chance for any further follow-up questions. Now's the chance for people to submit those questions if they want to. There has been one actually come in for you, Adrian, which is about FSC or PEFC membership and the relationship that those two certification organisations have with regard to the demonstration of compliance for timber regulations purposes. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Sure. So we don't accept those third-party certification schemes as a substitute for the the requirements under the timber regulations. It's not enough to simply show that you've got the certification there. What it can be is a useful mitigation measure. So where you've identified a risk in your supply chain, that third-party certification can be useful in addressing some of the questions around risk. I'm happy to go into more detail about the reasons for us not accepting it as a simple substitution for the due diligence system, but essentially it's addressing a separate issue, and it doesn't map on exactly with all the legality requirements of the supply chain, and it usually will address one particular component in the supply chain, so perhaps the forest management or a link in that supply chain, but it doesn't cover the full sweep of the supply chain, so it's not feasible for us to accept that. And sometimes the coverage is different from what is included in the supply chain.
Thank you very much, Adrian. That's very, very helpful indeed. We seem to have come to the end of the questions for today's webinar. So thank you all very much for those questions. I know we've had a large number of questions throughout, and that's been an excellent opportunity for people to engage with our speakers. Just in terms of summing up from my point of view, it's clearly a roller coaster ride ahead. I think the one key message I'd like to give people is that there are some very, very big changes ahead in our trading relationships, especially in the practicalities and logistics of trade. And those changes will be occurring irrespective of whether a free trade deal is agreed in these last few weeks of 2020 or not. So much is still uncertain. I would remind people that your CPI policy leads in the various areas are here to provide support and guidance if there are any particular questions that you ask. We've had a number of questions in the Q&A where we know people are taking those away for further responses, and we'll make sure that those questions are answered and those answers can be shared across the whole group. So thank you all very much for attending this morning into this afternoon. Hopefully you found that a useful session. We're now only just under 4 weeks away from the end of the Brexit transition period. There is lots that is going to be changing, and we look forward to working with you in order to make those changes as visible and practical to you as much as we possibly can. So thank you all very much.